Okay, Dad, today is Monday, August 5th, and there's a lot to talk about. So I don't even know where we want to begin. We got Venezuela, obviously the Iran Israel situation is everyone's on pins and needles waiting for the strike. The
Uh,
UK is burning. We got the economy tanking. There's a
yeah,
lot
well,
happening. Where do you
I
want
don't
to?
really I don't have anything to say about the economy, or I've just seen headlines, um,
Yeah, okay.
but
Well,
or the riots for that matter, But yeah, Venezuela definitely, Iran definitely, Ukraine definitely.
okay. Well, maybe we can hit all three if we have time.
Okay,
I know everybody wants to hear about Israel and Iran, but everybody's just kind of waiting for what's happening. So maybe we'll hold on that until towards the end. We can maybe cover some of the other things. We can start with
okay,
Venezuela. I don't know a whole lot about this, to be honest. I just know that there's elections. Maduro won, but then the U.S. said no, and then Elon Musk got involved and tweeted that saying that the opposition party won. So what's happening? Can you just break it down from the
yeah,
beginning?
okay. Well, yeah. First, I'll just say, a disclaimer. Well, I don't know a whole lot about Venezuela. It's not a place that I've studied, for a long period of time. I can say that definitely about Israel. I've been following developments in Israel, Palestine for decades, and been following the events in Ukraine assiduously. Hour after hour ever since war broke out about 2.5 years ago. So I feel like, yeah, I'm on very solid ground when I'm talking about those places. But Venezuela is new territory for me. But it's not that I don't know anything about it. I just want to, yeah, to more or less repeat what you said. There were elections held recently, and the winner, according to the official tally, there was Maduro, who is the incumbent. The I guess it was Gonzalez was supported by the U.S. and the West, by the usual suspects, and Gonzalez did not accept the results, and the U.S. and its Western allies or vassals, whatever you want to call them, immediately said that these results are tainted. Clearly, they're false. Yeah, Gonzalez was the winner. Um, yeah, I think the only evidence that I've heard them put, to um, support that claim is that there was some exit polls held, and then some polling done prior to the election, which indicated to them anyway that the opposition, that is Gonzalez, was going to win. Maybe win by a good 5 or 10%, and but it turned out the other way around. Now, I don't know enough. Let's see, on the one hand, this sounds suspiciously like a color revolution. It looks like the color revolution playbook, right? Which you've seen in many countries in Eastern Europe and other parts of the world. Um, you hold an election, you don't like the results, and then you start having protests, and immediately the U.S. and other countries, associated with the U.S. start to, crank up the organs of propaganda and declare, yeah, that the legitimate, you know, the the true winner and the legitimate president is this person, who's obviously pro-Western, and the other person is clearly, um, um, he's clearly illegitimate, right? And should not be recognized by anyone. It happens again and again. We've seen it maybe dozens of times. So it makes you wonder, right? It seems a
Hmm.
little bit too familiar, and how can they really know? In any case, they could have their suspicions, but they immediately declare they know who the winner is. Have they been counting the ballots? How can they really know? Who conducted
Right.
these exit polls? I don't know who conducted the exit polls, but some of the polls that were done prior to the election were conducted by groups very Western oriented groups that have done similar things in previous color revolutions. So I think there's a strong reason to be very suspicious of the Western claims. Um, but it's possible they cheated. I don't know enough about Maduro. But one thing I think I want to point out is that no matter what happens, it seems clear that the U.S. has U.S. and again, all its Western vassals clearly intervened in this election. because what are they doing? They have been applying the screws to the Venezuelan economy for years, right? They starting in 2018, they imposed severe economic sanctions, very severe, that went right to the heart of their economy, which is oil. That has caused billions of dollars of losses. And they made it clear it's because the wrong person is in charge, Maduro. They don't consider it legitimate. He's got to go. And then one of their appointed or approved candidates, if that a candidate gets elected like Gonzalez, then they'll um, end the sanctions, right? Well, that's just some kind of blackmail. So what kind of, even if the other side actually did win, you say, well, this is really not a fair election. We have the world's greatest power holding a gun to the head of these voters, figuratively speaking. Um, so that's one thing I just wanted to point out. And then, yeah, the other thing is the sanctions themselves. This was a poor country to begin with. If you go back, I think it was like in the early 2000s, it was, not prosperous, but under Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, a lot of people were lifted out of extreme poverty. And that was a time when oil prices were high. And then oil prices crashed and they began to experience these very severe economic problems. I mean, that happens with an economy that relies too much on oil or some other natural resource. Economists actually call that a resource curse. There's a temptation to really kind of distort your economy and because resource prices tend to fluctuate rather wildly. And when you're riding high, you make a lot of decisions as though that was normal, but it's not. There are good times and there are bad times, and if you don't prepare for the bad times, you really suffer. And I think one criticism that clearly could be fairly made of Hugo Chavez is that he didn't prepare for the bad times, for the low oil prices. But so anyway, that happened, the crash, there were a lot of people who went back into severe poverty. But then on top of that, the U.S. applied very severe sanctions. I know we're talking about billions of dollars, and they seized billions of dollars. They, imposed sanctions on oil exports. They seized their very large gas station. If I know you're familiar with it, Citgo, which is quite, common in the state of Tennessee and other states of the U.S. They quite simply took that from the uh, Venezuelan government and handed it over to Juan Guaido, who they had anointed the true president.
I
This
remember
is,
that guy.
yeah, right. So anyway, I mean, it was just outright theft, and it was done to a poor country, and then you have this country is pushed deeper into poverty, and then you say, well, look what this terrible government's done. Now we got to save them, but look, it's hard to say, okay, I'm sure they made some bad economic decisions, but you're piling these sanctions and stealing their money on top of it. It's just like you're not in a position to start lecturing them and, telling them, how they should run their country because you're doing everything you can to make them miserable. Um,
Okay, well,
I,
here's
I, I,
my
yeah, go
my
ahead.
question. My question is just why? What does the U.S. have against Maduro so much?
Well,
Why
I
can't we
think,
work with it? Why
yeah,
do we just let them do what they want to do and we just trade with them normally?
right, right. The superficial answer that you would get on TV, mainstream TV, is that we're just concerned about the rights of the people of Venezuela. That they've been deprived of of their votes have been stolen from them or something like that, right? Um, of course, this is nonsense because we're very selective about where countries where we're concerned about human rights and democracy. There's really virtually no concern in Saudi Arabia, but then we're hyper concerned in Iran, for example. So it just shows you it's not
Hmm.
really about that. That's the excuse that's always given. I think that it comes down to geopolitics and natural resources. It's just that Venezuela has been friendly with the enemies of the United States. Russia and Iran has a foreign policy that is clearly anti-U.S. imperialist. So that's part of it. And the other part is that they have tremendous oil resources. So I mean, it's a very important country within the Western Hemisphere for that reason, if for no other.
Does the U.S. has some impressive oil reserves, right? Is it just the problem that we're not extracting it because of our environmental regulatory laws? Or can we be pretty energy dependent, or do we always rely on, countries like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela for
Yeah,
oil?
well,
Is that
right. That's a technical question that I don't really have the answer to. I remember it was not too long ago that the U.S. was like going back to the 1990s. The U.S. was, and earlier, the U.S. was a major importer of oil. That seemed to be the way it was going to be going way, way back. You think about Texas in the early days of the automobile. Yeah, we were completely energy independent. We produced more than enough for ourselves. But sometime, I don't know exactly where it happened, we began to import oil, clearly in the 60s or maybe earlier. And that seemed to be the trend. But then with new technologies, namely fracking, we began to extract more oil from our own oil fields here in the U.S. and became a net exporter. Now, I maybe that's coming up to an end. It's a technical question that I just don't know the answer to, but that's something worth looking into.
interesting? Yeah. So, I'm just wondering. Like, I mean, it's not like Venezuela isn't selling their oil to us, right? I
Well,
mean,
they were, yeah,
it did.
that's right.
So I don't understand why we were so angry. It's not like they were saying we're not going to sell to you. Is it just because they were
Yeah.
selling to some other people we didn't like?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
I think
the
it's the geopolitics. We don't. Here's a country. Well, one thing is, okay, it's poor, but it has the potential to be rich because it's so oil rich, right? And its geopolitical orientation is unacceptable to us. I mean, again, you pointed out in the past, like, yeah, well,
our,
who cares? We can live with this, but our again, our hegemons just can't. We the people who run this country believe in American global hegemony, and they see
so
Venezuela as a potential threat.
there's got to be. Is there some real like anti-American rhetoric coming out of Venezuela? I mean, probably because of the sanctions, but
Oh yeah,
prior to
oh
that,
yes, sir. And I think prior to
the
that there was too. Hugo Chavez was a real kind of fiery populist, and there's
mm,
a strong tradition in Latin America, kind of anti-Yankee, um, anti-Yankee rhetoric, and more than that, right? So this is something that has, we still have Cuba, which is still in the revolutionary leftist camp, but a lot of those other countries have drifted away. It seemed like a greater threat decades ago, but yeah, again, there's this obsession
so the only
with,
reason we're
especially with,
trying to
yeah, with an obsession with
so the only
keeping
reason we're trying to
America, keeping the Americas, North America and South America. This is our part of the world, right? Especially around the Caribbean, the Monroe Doctrine. That we don't want to have uh, any rival power, anybody that's not allied with us. We just have very little tolerance. We have little tolerance for on the other side of the world, right? But the tolerance is even, you know, even less tolerance for that kind of thing on our side of the world, and especially, with in the Mediterranean area. Now, I think it's absurd. It's an obsession that's gone too far, but it's clearly there.
So are you really just saying that really the only crime Venezuela committed is that it's not subservient to the United States, that
Yeah.
the
Well, I mean,
government
that's
isn't
yeah.
like,
Well,
okay,
that's a
we'll
crime that
do everything the
every
US says?
yeah, yeah. Basically, I mean, that's the crime that all of the enemies, the
How-
axis of evil, look, Iran, Russia, that's the crime that they committed. It wasn't, it's just sorry, but the idea that we're actually concerned about authoritarianism or a lack of democracy. You just look at the countries that we support. It's absolutely meaningless. It doesn't make a bit of sense because you can
right.
find
And
actually on those
well,
measures they actually do quite well compared to a lot of other countries in the region. It's just that they're not subordinate to us.
right.
They're
So
not
so
part of the team.
and then right, and when you're saying they're not subordinate to us, it's not like they're our enemies. They're not actively trying to hurt us. We're
Right.
making them enemies
Right.
because they're not subordinate. We end up sanctioning them and we end up
Right.
hurting them. But they actually pose no threat to the United States, right?
Right.
So this is
Yeah.
this is the more I kind of understand the world and how the U.S. operates in it, it's just such an asinine foreign policy the United States has. It's so self-destructive. It's just like we really are the bully. You got to
Uh-huh.
pay, give me some of your school lunch constantly, and if not, I'm gonna beat you up. That's kind of our. It feels like the way
Yeah.
we operate.
Right.
And even now that we're come to this point where we basically pushed and formed the creation of BRICS Plus and a new financial system that doesn't rely on the dollar because of everything we're doing, we're still doubling down on the
Right.
same bad decisions to expedite our own demise. And it just, I guess the problem is you have so many people in the foreign policy deep state that this is their job. Is they're working like, oh, what do? We do color revolutions. We got to make sure everybody's supported, and they just seem to be on autopilot,
Yeah.
moving forward on this path, even though nobody steps back. Like, hey, wait a minute, guys, what's
This
our
isn't
end
working.
goal? To make
Yeah.
America more prosperous,
Right. Right.
make America safer. Well, this isn't working. We're throwing away millions of dollars, billions of trillions of dollars, and the world's hating us the more we do it. Maybe we should kind of rework our, sort of our company values or whatever it is you want to talk about as
Yeah.
here at this institution.
Right.
But that's not possible. There is no way to reform it.
Yeah.
At least I
No,
don't think so,
there,
right?
yeah, there doesn't seem to
Like,
be, there's no signs of any sort of awareness or, awakening within the foreign policy elite in this country at this time. Yeah, they're doubling down. It's more of the
well,
same.
no, right. So Elon Musk, he's clearly a smart guy. He builds rocket ships. He wants to
Yeah.
colonize Mars, and I appreciate a
Yeah.
lot of things he did. Buying Twitter, he's eccentric. Why would this guy say automatically tweet support that for Gonzalez and start meddling in the election of? It just doesn't seem like a smart thing to do. Like how do you know Elon Musk?
Right, right,
well,
right. Yeah,
well,
you
why would
might
he
have
tweet that? Why
right. You
and
might
just
have
just
reasons, legitimate reasons to be suspicious, but I don't see how he could know, that the election was stolen. They made these decisions immediately, like 24 hours afterwards. This is, or even sooner. This, the moment that the results were announced. Yeah, well, maybe part of it is that he he's very much pro-capitalist. He himself is sort of an uber capitalist, right? And it's true,
Mhm.
that Venezuela is a socialist country and represents, a completely different system that he finds just very, unacceptable, unsavory. But that doesn't seem like a reason to try to overthrow it. We live in a big world, and we can let different countries experiment with different systems, and if it's a failure of a system, everybody will see it.
Right.
It's just, and eventually they'll change course themselves. The way to make sure that they don't change course is that you continually try to meddle from the outside. That just makes I any certainly many Venezuelans simply very resentful. And some of them, interestingly enough, I heard like one of the parties that announced that they agreed with the results of Maduro. That the government reported. It was actually a pro-capitalist party, anti-socialist, but they also believe in sovereignty. You know, in other words, they're against foreign meddling. And that seems to me, it's just the only honorable sort of position. You say that, okay, yeah, maybe I don't like this guy's policies, but I'm not going to let the U.S. dictate who's the winner and who's the loser. I'm not going to let dictate the U.S. Blackmail us through economic sanctions to choose a candidate of their choosing. That's just not acceptable. You just got to get out and let us work this out ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. That's such a reasonable, common sense approach. You don't go into somebody else's house and tell them how to, raise their kids or do whatever and arrange their furniture. It's, you have to
Yeah.
be respectful.
Right. You might say,
But
look in
we
through the
clearly don't
window and say,
understand that.
yeah, boy, that place looks like a mess. But hey, yeah, you don't knock on the door and tell them what to do, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's just. I think you're right. I think it's just Elon Musk as a capitalist views. And so many people that are on that capitalist camp are very anti-socialist, anti-communist because they've seen the horrors that socialism and communism has brought upon the world, or they know the history of it. Not it. It is not a smart form of governance, and we can go into it. But I totally agree. We shouldn't be getting involved in that. But I think that's just that focus is like we have to get rid of the scourge of communism. It's so evil that we need to do
Yeah.
whatever it is in our power to prevent it, or else that country will be destroyed. I think that's the mindset. But I think people also have to realize that things aren't black and white. The perfect example of this is China. China, they're like, oh, the Communist Party of China. There's an example of a communist country. It's not a communist country. You go there, it's a very capitalist country. It's a very prosperous country. It's a very well-run, efficient country. I'm speaking as somebody that's lived there for 10 years. You also know China very well, speak the language. But that's the idea, is that people just sort of quickly add these labels. And that's always dangerous when people do that. Like, oh, we'll put this country in this bin with the bad countries. It's socialism, communism. And I think people need to realize that it's very complex. I mean, who can say that the U.S. is really a capitalist country now? I mean, you got to ask the government if you can wipe your butt now. It's ridiculous. We're becoming a crony capitalist country that is bought and paid for by different lobby groups, big pharma, and of course APAC. Maybe we can use that to segue into
Sure.
the Israel Palestine and Iran issue. So what I was hearing some chatter that Iran was supposed to retaliate today, according to U.S. intel. Although, I mean, because I believe it's a Jewish holiday today as well. But immediately when I heard that, my initial reaction is like, well, then it's not going to be today. This isn't the tit for tat response like we had before. If it's a military operation, it should be something that when we don't expect it to happen,
Right.
they're not
Exactly.
going to prepare it. And if it's leaking out already, if I'm hearing that, oh, it's going to happen today, then like, no, it's not going to happen today. Maybe I'm wrong. But it seems like the U.S. and the West seem to try to put more significance on like these doing dates on events on sort of dates that might have
Right.
carry some type of weight or significance.
Right. Right.
Where
I think
we
the
see that in
Jewish,
Ukraine.
right. The Jewish holiday that you're talking about, I think
Yeah.
that's August 12th. So they put that out as another
Mm.
possible date. Um, but yeah, you're absolutely right. This is not like the first retaliation that we saw back in April, because again, that was a demonstration. It wasn't actually a military operation, right? It's very important to understand that. And because it was a demonstration, they in fact wanted to announce the day, on which it was going to occur, so that everybody, the Israelis, the Americans, would understand what was going on. Um, but this is different. They said this is going to be a military operation, which means that they are intending to do damage to military assets in Israel, and you don't announce when or where you're going to strike. Obviously, you don't, and so we can't know. We simply can't know. Now, I think it's just,
Hmm.
you know, I think it has to be relatively soon, meaning rather days rather than weeks or months, because the pressure on they said they're going to retaliate. If they let it go on too long, then it, I think everyone will look at it and say that you didn't, you blinked, right? I think it's just like,
Hmm.
and who knows what will happen in the meantime? Israel will strike again, or so I think that it can't be too far in the future. So within the next several days, it could be tonight, but it could be a week from now. Who knows? They, they'll
Do you
choose
think
their
that Israel might try to be preemptive and strike now? Because that's kind of their MO. They don't. They have. It's got to be people got to be on high alert in Israel. A lot of
right,
anxiety, going to bed every night,
right.
like, ooh, is this going to be the night when all of a sudden drones and missiles are coming into my city?
Oh,
No, well, one
it's
thing that
yeah,
I guess
certainly a possibility.
yeah. Go ahead and answer that first.
Yeah. Yeah, I've
Yes.
heard that. There have been
So
reports. I think it was, in fact, maybe coming from Israel, from the IDF itself, that it possibly, that a preemptive strike might be carried out. But now I don't know why that's being announced, you kind of wonder if it was really going to be a preemptive strike, we probably wouldn't hear anything about it. It would be a total surprise, like in 1967.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one thing that, if you're an Israeli citizen, obviously I would be very worried,
Yeah,
concerned. But
sure.
one thing that, as much as, the Western propaganda and Israeli propaganda likes to paint Hezbollah and Iran and the Houthis and everybody as these terrorists, they're actually they actually are very careful about not trying to strike civilian populations centers.
Right.
They really just target military installations, and I believe that they're not going to be doing what Israel does, which is just bomb residential buildings, carpet bomb cities.
Right.
They are going to be very, I think, careful with their targeting and try to knock out as many military installations right off the bat. Now it's going to be interesting to see how much they can handicap Israel when they do this, when they take out as much as they can. And then the thing is what we'll see after this. I'm sure there may be some civilian casualties in this massive barrage that will be coming, not even likely.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then Israel will capitalize on that to escalate, decimating a city like Beirut. That's really what I fear. I think Israel might use a nuke. I think they
Yeah.
might. But
Yeah.
then I'm just wondering, how would they do that? Could they do it? I mean,
Right.
and if they did
Yeah.
do that, then it's over for them, right? They're an international pariah. It's like, okay, they'll use their propaganda to try to say that this is justified, but it's going to be so horrific that I don't think anybody can even look at it that way. Well, hopefully, not even the U.S. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on how this might
Uh,
play out?
yeah. Well, I think that there's reason to fear that they will resort to nuclear weapons at some point if it's clear that they're losing. Um, I don't think they would go to it right away. I think that's highly unlikely. I think the plan is to get a war started and bring the U.S. in, and they figure that the U.S. will finish off Iran for them and Lebanon. I think that's what they've got planned. Um, but but the best laid plans go awry, and especially in war, they always do. And it may turn out very badly. It may end up that they'll realize, like the Ukrainians are realizing now, that the the U.S. is not all powerful. That its power is actually quite limited, especially at this time. After it has given so much
Hmm.
of its stockpiles to Ukraine. Its air defense is resources are, assets are greatly depleted at this point. Maybe they have enough to defend against one more major drone and missile attack, but they might not have any more after that. I mean, really, um, you, they only have. It's clear that they're running short on all kinds of air defense missiles. So, and then Israel
Right.
will at some point will realize, oh my God, we're defenseless. We've shot all of our air defense missiles. The U.S. has run out of it, and now the Hezbollah in Iran still have many, and now we just have these empty skies above us. There's nothing to protect us, and at that point, it's possible, when they are really in fear of losing a war, they might resort to a tactical nuclear weapon. I think it's possible. I mean, it's just, we've seen it's not like they've really shown any restraint in dealing with Gaza or Lebanon for that matter.
Right. Right. They don't care about civilian deaths. So do you think they would use, where would they use a nuclear weapon?
Well, that's a good question. Um, I I don't see the purpose of using it on Beirut. Again, their enemy is in southern Lebanon. That's where Hezbollah's forces are concentrated. But the thing is that that there's not like one city in southern Lebanon, a headquarters. I think the forces are relatively dispersed, so it doesn't seem um, like a nuclear weapon would really, um, achieve a real victory for them. It's tactical nuclear weapons are useful, for example, like just taking out an entire air base. but there's not really an air base in southern Lebanon. Um, but they could use one against Iran. In Iran, they might actually use it to Tehran. For again,
They would nuke
Netanyahu and other
Tehran.
Israeli leaders. Yeah, no, again, like I don't think this will ever happen, but we're being completely hypothetical here. If things it was looking like they were going to lose, and they were taking a real beating, let's say from Iranian missiles, they could do something like
Well,
that.
that's what's going
Again,
to
I think when
happen.
if they're
They
well,
are.
I don't.
I mean, come on. Okay, well, what can what can they do? You already just said that they only have enough air defense missiles for maybe one more barrage, and then they're left, with their pants around their ankles. And
Right.
then, like, what do you say? Okay,
Yeah.
what is the U.S. going to do? It's we have all these bases in the Middle East, but they don't even have air defense systems because a lot of them don't have any air defense, from what I understand. They've shipped a lot of it over to Ukraine or wherever. They're just sitting ducks out there. They're
Uh-huh.
just camps out there that
Right.
will be struck with these missiles. And when we assassinated Soleimani, they've shown how precise their missiles are
Right.
at hitting U.S. bases, and we weren't able to knock
Right.
down any of those missiles that struck our U.S. bases. So,
Right. Right.
so
Yeah.
these U.S. bases gone. They're not as soon as maybe they get one plane off the ground and do something, do some damage, and then Iran will knock them out and will destroy all these bases. And then what we have, our Navy, it'll be gone too, right? Like if they get too close within range. So how much? So what can the United States even do? I think what this is going to turn into, it's going to turn into a United States rescue operation where we're putting our boats on the shore so that way Israeli citizens can evacuate and get onto these boats because what are they going to do? And let's if they do go nuclear, because they're so fanatical in there and they just can't believe that this is happening to them and they're going to set off a nuke. That that is instant condemnation for the state of Israel to resort to a nuclear weapon
Mhm.
like this, right? Nobody's going to look
Yeah.
at them and be like, "Oh, well, they're reasonable is
Yeah.
justified," except a few crazies here
Yeah.
in Zionists. Just the Zionists will think that think that this is a part of God's
Yeah.
plan. We need to bring about the apocalypse. So I just don't see any way
Yeah.
out for this. Whenever I kind of try to war game it, it always ends with there's not a lot that we can do. Yeah, we can kill civilians and blow up some cities, but there's not
Right.
that much I feel like the United States can do. Or
Right. Well,
Israel.
I
Or
think
am
we
I
can
wrong?
still
Am I missing
we
something
can
here?
yeah.
Like, what's the
Well,
plan?
I don't really know exactly how, and actually nobody knows for sure. But the U.S. still has a lot of firepower and can do a lot of damage, with their with Air Force and with their Navy, to both to Lebanon and to Iran. Now in Lebanon again, I don't think they can really make a significant difference there because again, Hezbollah, though it is much more organized than the Houthi forces, again, it's they've created these underground bunkers. They don't have major installations that could be destroyed. Nothing that I'm aware of. So we could blow up a lot of things in Lebanon, but I don't think we could really seriously harm the harm Hezbollah there. Now, Iran's a different story. I mean, this is a large country, and they do have military infrastructure that could be severely damaged. And we could do. I'm sure we could do a fair amount of damage. Now, they do have some decent air defense. They have a lot of S-300s, and maybe better um, from Russia. And then I've heard recently that Russia has shipped away some of their state-of-the-art electronic warfare installations. I guess
Right.
these. So, right. So it may not be very easy for us to
That
damage that infrastructure, but I'm sure some missiles will get through. That always happens.
Right, right. But yeah, that's what I was going to say as well. Actually, I think Shoigu, the former defense minister of Russia, is currently in Iran right now, and
Right.
they are, like you said, setting up these very advanced electronic defense systems, as well as deploying S-300s, 400s, maybe even 500s. So some of the best which are the best air defense systems in the world, right? That I think that's fair to say. The Patriot system
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be able to hold up against the Russian air defense systems. Is that true?
I think it's true. Yeah. I don't think you'll ever get
And
the U.S. Defense Department or Lockheed Martin or to admit to it, but I believe that's true.
Right. And also the offensive capabilities of the United States are much weaker than that of Russia and Iran as well in terms of missile technology. We don't have any missiles that can go as fast as the Fatah missiles or the Kinjals or the Russian missiles. Russia, I think, has missiles that can go up to speed of Mach 30. I don't think we have anything that can go
Oh yeah,
above
right,
Mach 8
right.
or
Yeah,
even
there's
I
no
don't even
question
I don't
that
even know
right.
that.
No,
So we
right.
have
Well,
poor
yeah,
defense
Russia
capabilities.
is right.
Basically, so
Russia
then
is
once
way
again,
ahead
I
in
just
missile technology. That's not, but Iran, I
right
don't
way
know
ahead in missile
exactly where they are,
technology.
but right. Yeah, I don't know
Well, we've
exactly
seen
where
some of
Iran
it.
is. It's they're right. Yeah, they do have. They're it's believed that they do have some hypersonic missiles where it's just not entirely clear, and it's not clear, and also it's believed that, or I've heard again and again, that Hezbollah has something like an arsenal of 100,000 or 150,000 missiles. That's what I've heard, but and maybe it's true. It probably
Like
is true,
even
but we don't know. A lot of these things you don't really know until the bullets really start flying and the missiles start firing.
right,
We'll
but
find out.
even if they only had 10% of that, that will overwhelm any of the air defense systems of Israel and the United States combined. I think people don't understand that, like how that tiny little demonstration Iran did was
Yeah,
basically max capacity, and we spent $2 billion in air defense, and then all of a sudden we've depleted half our stockpiles. Like that's really what happened,
yeah,
and so we are delusional in thinking that this we can win this war. People are still just stuck in the 1990s and watch too many Rambo movies and think that
right.
I don't know what they think is going to happen, but we are in a new era of warfare where it is missiles, drones, air defense, electronic defense systems. Guess what? America is not number one in any of those categories, but not by a long shot. So it doesn't. We'll see what happens. I mean, look, Russia, Ukraine finally got their F-16s. We've been talking about, okay, yeah, our air force is really what we are, our crown jewel. What is it
Mhm.
going to do? Let's see what can it do against Russian air
Yeah,
defense systems. Nothing.
right. Well, I think
The
it's yeah. I think even like the Ukrainians themselves, I believe Sersky was saying that they're going to keep them over in West Ukraine. Essentially, they're going to play an air defense role, meaning that just like the um, American
Sidewinder
aircraft.
interceptors.
Yeah, yeah. During the April demonstration that Iran, well, again, most of those were shot down not by the Iron Dome. I think the Iron Dome shot down very few, but most of those drones and missiles were shot down by U.S., French, and British aircraft, using air-to-air missiles. And that's the same role that the F-16 apparently is going to play. It's going to stay over in the western part of Ukraine, as far from the front line as possible, but maybe protect Lvov and some other cities there out in the west. And maybe they contribute a little bit to the air defense, but it doesn't seem to me that they can do an awful lot.
Hmm. I can't hear you anymore, Dad.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying anything. That's why.
Oh,
Hey, you can't hear
hello.
me. Yeah, I was. Hello, I'm here.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
yeah. Okay, it was breaking up a little bit, but it's better now.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I stopped
Um,
talking for a while.
yeah,
So anyway,
I think that. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I have a feeling that this war is going to not. Who knows? Maybe it's going to drag out, but I just don't see it lasting very long because I just don't think that there's a lot that Israel and the U.S. can really do. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm missing something. Am I? Like, what is it? You keep on saying they got a lot of firepower, but can you explain how they would use it? What it could do? Or
yeah.
like how would the U.S. strike
Well,
Iran? Like,
right.
do we even
Well,
know? Like,
they
how would they
can.
do that?
Right. I mean, we have a lot. They can use F-35s as standoff weapons. They can fire some cruise missiles and other missiles into Iran. And certainly some of
Okay,
those
well,
would get
all
through
right.
even
Well,
against a good air defense.
okay. Well, I guess I won't war game it too much. We're just going to have to wait and see. But
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, that's
I
right.
just
It's
think
just going to be
Israel.
crazy. And and everybody's going to be surprised by some of the outcomes, including ourselves. We have to
Yeah.
admit that just like when wars never really turn out the way that people expect, or very rarely. We'll just put it that way. There are a lot of question marks. For
Mm.
example, we've had some suggestions that maybe um, Hezbollah has some air defense capabilities. There have been at least a couple of stories of Israeli and U.S. Uh, fighters hightailing it out of there because they realized that the Hezbollah was locking onto them from below. Um, is that true? If so, how much they have? If they have a lot, then that could, maybe that they're hiding at this point. We'll find out exactly what they have, and it may be more or less than what we imagine. We won't know until a real war breaks out.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think people also need to just realize that how weak the U.S. is right now militarily, just from the Ukraine war. We really have exhausted our stockpiles. Are you able to talk about that a bit? Like, the proof that we're scratching the bottom of the barrel?
Yeah, well, I mean, to give you an example, it was just like a month ago where the story came out that the U.S. was trying to convince Israel to send some of its, I think, 8 Patriot missile systems to Ukraine. And the U.S. has been, bending arms, throughout Europe, trying to get Europeans to give up some of their Patriot missile systems. So it's clear that they don't have them. That's the thing. If they had them, they would simply supply them
Hmm.
directly. Instead, they've actually had to. They tried to persuade Israel. I don't think successfully. And Israel had actually, by the way, as we had talked about earlier, had mothballed those systems because they found them not to be effective. But I think now that they're faced with the possibility of a real attack, from both Israel and Hezbollah, they say, well, even if they're not really very effective, we just got to have everything, use everything that we have, right? Um,
Hmm.
so, I mean, that just tells you what's going on. The U.S. has been scrounging up these systems from around the world, but then it's also reported that okay, they've got the systems, but they don't have the missiles. There was even prior to the Ukraine war, there were complaints, within, I think Saudi Arabia was just found it was short of missiles, and the U.S. was trying to persuade other countries in the Middle East to supply them with temporary lend missiles, or supply missiles to Saudi Arabia with a promise that the U.S. would deliver missiles later to those countries. So I think they're already way behind on all kinds of their obligations. They simply don't have them. And then we know that they've been producing only 550 a year, which again is nothing. It's just nothing. You're going to use 2 of these missiles, each of which is $4 million, to knock down one target. Talking about $8 million a pop, and there's only 550 that they can produce in a year. Obviously, they can't even get close to keeping up with it. They're trying to crank that up to 650, which is, you know, uh, more, but not much, but with very little success in that regard. Yeah, so yeah, it's clear
Hmm.
that the U.S. is in a fix. That they've obviously kept some in reserve, but I doubt it can be very much. We'll find out exactly what
Right.
it is. We may if we have a major attack anyway.
So yeah, this event is happening at kind of the worst possible time for the United States. We are greatly weakened. I mean, I also heard that we were going to South Korea and Japan, asking them to hand over their munitions as well because we didn't have enough and to send them over to Ukraine. We completely ran out of 155 millimeter shells, so that's why we had to send these old cluster munitions to Ukraine. And then I
Right.
heard we put out with our huge defense budget, we said, oh, we'll just buy more of these 155 millimeter shells on the market, which just meant that we paid 10 times the amount we should for
Yeah.
shells. But the problem is there's just not enough. So we were going to African countries trying to buy shells from them
Right.
because we don't make it. And then that's the thing that everybody just doesn't realize. If you just sit back and think about it rationally, like, oh, wait, the US doesn't make anything anymore. We design cool things, we make prototypes, the over engineered, overpriced stuff with our military equipment, but we don't actually build that much. And if we want to build more, we don't have the capability anyway. We don't have any of the manufacturing expertise. Building up a manufacturing base is not something you can do overnight, and that's the
Yeah,
problem. So many politicians, and
yeah,
I think just people think that we'll just throw $500 billion at that, and
money at
then
it.
boom, we got all the best stuff. It's like that doesn't
Right,
it doesn't
right,
work that way. We don't. And I
right.
think you said something else that over 40% of all of our military hardware relies on components from China. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah, that report came out recently, a couple weeks ago. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
it's true.
And I mean, it's also probably important to know that. So there you go. Like this is just insanity. Just do the math. Nobody's doing the math. Nobody's actually looking at the nuts and bolts of this.
Yeah,
They're just running high on the reputation of the United States military from 30, 40
uh-huh.
years ago. And in reality, really, even
Right,
then, the U.S. hasn't won a war since World War II. We're running on the World War II reputation. You know, like
right.
we've
Yeah.
been great
Well,
at
yeah,
bullying
that may be
third
true,
world
but you're
countries.
right.
That's
Yeah,
it.
right, right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
Maybe I've been
I think
too
there's no, yeah,
pessimistic on
yeah,
our capabilities, but I think that they're
yeah,
so
yeah, there,
overinflated that it's going to be such a rude
yeah,
shock to the
right.
world.
Yeah. I think there's no question that, for example, in the 1990s, we really didn't have any military rival. But yeah, the world has changed, and our economy has since has hollowed out, and yeah, um, y- y- clearly, yeah, we do have rivals now, and we do live in an age of limits. Politicians don't understand it. They seem to think, yeah, there's always just a matter of having the willpower and the money. That seems to be they don't understand. They're not interested in the actual like physical realities, and that's where the real constraints are. And so anyway, yeah, that's why
Hmm.
we'll find out. Maybe if this turns out, maybe this major conflict won't occur. Maybe Iran will do something to, like it did last time, just strike enough, but not too much to uh, provoke a major response from Israel.
I don't
Um,
think so. I think it doesn't
but I
matter
think
what
I think
Iran
I think you're
does.
right. I'm right. I think you're right. I don't think we're going to evade it this time. I think it's going to be a major conflict, and then we'll see. Then reality will become apparent to all of us.
Yeah, I just wonder what that will mean for life back here in America for the West. Like what is it? What does that end up turning into? You have any
Yeah, it's
idea?
hard to. I actually I don't, because I'll tell you, it's just like almost nothing that's happened in these last 20 years do I feel like I could have predicted. It's just that our culture and our politics have taken some really strange turns in the last several years. So I'm not going to say that I pretend. It's sort of like, again, we opened a Pandora's box and all kind of weird creatures are flying out of it. And so all I can say is that if, for example, an aircraft carrier gets sunk, or it's or we fail to defeat Iran, right? It always just seemed like a question of willpower to so many of our politicians. But Iran does real damage to us, and some of our bases are just smoking ruins. That's going to be a real psychological blow. That's just going to, I'll say, open up the Pandora's box again, and some new weird creature's going to come out. And I don't claim to
Hmm.
pretend what that's going to be.
Oh, scary times. Okay, well, maybe we can just finish real quick. Maybe you can give us sort of a recap what's happening on the front in Ukraine. Seems like we forget that there's a major war going on over there. You're in
Yeah,
Moscow right now. You can kind of tell us what's the mood there in Russia and what's going on in
right,
the front right now.
right. Well, again, if you did, with one exception, I haven't seen anything that would let you know that a war is going on here. Life seems very normal. The city is prosperous, clean. People are busy doing, working their jobs, and there are a lot of there were a lot of tourists in Red Square today. Uh, Beautiful time of year, by the way. It's a good time to visit Moscow. Um, there was just one thing. There was one little exhibit out in front of a church not far from Red Square that where people had put up photographs of soldiers and different military personnel that had been killed in the conflict in the Ukraine. So you could see hundreds and hundreds of photos, and there were flowers around that. People were laying flowers before the photos. But other than that, there was just no reminder of the war. There was nothing. It just seemed life seems as normal as can be here. But of course, there is a real war going on that's being fought very intensively. And I won't go into great detail on it. I'll just say that um, what's happening now is that that okay, the Russian forces are back actually in February. They broke through the first line of defenses, this line of fortifications, which is sometimes called the Zelensky line. It's been built up over the period of several years, really going back to 2014 all the way up to 2022 when the war broke out, or the most recent um, let's say episode of this war, because it really did begin back in 2014. um, Now that line of fortifications has been very, very difficult to break through. I mean, it's we're talking about all kinds of trenches and underground bunkers and pillboxes and all that. Again, a lot of you know, um, built over the course of many, many years, and so there was very, very little movement on the line until um, the Russian forces first took Avdiivka. That was really the largest city on this line. This was said the fortress city, and some people have said it's maybe the most fortified city in the world. And then Marinka, a smaller city to the south. And when that happened, then things started moving, and they began to take out the other fortifications on the Zelensky line. And more than that, they began to move west and move west. I wouldn't say rapidly, but relative to what was happening before, really pretty fast. And now what they're doing is, well, there's a second line that's not as strong as the first line, which is known as the Poroshenko line. And they're breaking through that, or have already broken through that, west of Ocheretino, which is the town just north of Avdiivka. And they're moving, in a lot of other wars, you wouldn't call this rapid. But it used to be that maybe they would move 100 meters a day, like when they were going through Bakhmut or something. But now it's a kilometer a day or a kilometer and a half a day. They're going much faster, because two things are happening. Well, one is that they've broken through these fortifications, and there really aren't the same kind of fortifications behind them. And then second, it's just that the Ukrainians just do not have the forces that they used to have. They don't have the reserves. They used to, well, they suffered a lot of losses like in 2022, but you could look at a map. I remember looking at the military summary channel, and you get these daily reports, and you see these little icons showing the different brigades. And there are a whole bunch of these brigades. So, like every time the Russians maybe chewed up a brigade on the front line, they just moved another one in and plugged the hole. So, there was very little movement because they could keep on putting fresh bodies there on the front line. And again, they had those good fortifications, but those fortifications are breaking down. They've been broken through, and they just don't have the reserves. So when they punch a hole, there's really very little to stop them, and that's what's happening west of Ocheretino.
So it doesn't sound like this could go on that much longer. And then with the looming Israel-Iran conflict coming in, the the Ukraine's going to be put on the back burner. They're going to have even fewer
Yeah,
munitions coming in, right? Like they're in trouble. There's
right,
I mean, we already know that the war is over. It's just seeing basically the game now is, can we keep this war going until the election, which is such a horrible thing to say. Like, do you have enough
right.
people that we can kill until we get to the election day and then we can stop it? It's like, well, probably not.
Yeah,
We'll probably run out of men
yeah,
before that. And that's just such a
yeah,
horrific thing
right.
that we just
Yeah. Well,
sacrifice all
I
these
don't,
young men,
right. I don't think
destroy
they
their
want to,
lives, destroy a whole
right.
country.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't think they actually want to stop it after the election. They'll probably want to keep it going. But you're right; they want to keep the lines from collapsing before then. They want to make it appear to be a stalemate, and it's becoming increasingly hard to do. I mean, there's
Well, the
still a
way
lot of Ukrainian propaganda. Again, I'll go through my Google feed, and there's just nothing. The Ukraine, you would just get the sense the Ukrainians are just, are just going from strength to strength. Just constantly um, defeating the Russians. On every point of the line. The poor befuddled Russians. But if you actually look, who's gaining territory and who's losing territory, it's obvious what's going on.
Mhm. Yeah, there's just
But yeah,
the
again,
whole
it hasn't
world's
made it
about to
into the
change.
consciousness. Yeah, and it hasn't made it into
Yeah,
what I guess what I'm trying to say is it hasn't made it into the consciousness of the mainstream yet, right? Just what's happening there. People who are paying close attention, including pro-Ukrainian people, like Julian Rebke is a German journalist, very strong supporter of Ukraine. But he's saying, for example, like before a year ago, he said, well, at this rate, the Russians will get to Kiev in 30 years. He says, no, well, now at this rate, where they're going to get to Kiev in 2 years. And I think he's being very realistic. And in fact, it probably would be faster because it's accelerating. I mean, there's
right.
the line's moving faster now, but I think it's only going to accelerate as the months go by. Ukraine will continue to get weaker. Russia will continue to get it stronger, and so that the line will move faster and faster.
Yeah. I mean, the world's changing rapidly, but it's about to change big
Yeah,
time. I think once
yeah,
this Ukraine
right.
defeat it breaks through the mainstream and people realize like,
Okay,
oh man, we really
right,
messed up here. Maybe NATO even ceases
right.
to exist. And then what happens with Iran, Israel, once, Israel starts having to evacuate their citizens and the whole state of Israel whole existence is now being put into question, and that's talked about openly mainstream. Then we're
Yeah,
talking about the
yeah,
whole U.S. empire
right.
itself is collapsed, and
Yeah,
the whole thing is just going to change. And I just don't know how it's going to play out.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
terrifying.
Nobody
It's
knows.
exciting,
Nobody knows.
but yeah. And the weird thing is though, just also I think so many like we said, it hasn't penetrated the mainstream psyche. I turn on the news, there is nothing about. I was watching, I find a few clips every now and then, but for the most part, everything is about the election. If you turn on, MSNBC, it's all about Trump, 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 and then you turn it on Fox, it's all
Yeah,
about Kamala, 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 and they're not even
yeah,
really asking these people how would they handle these situations. The world's on fire right now, and nobody seems to be
right,
paying
right,
attention. Everybody.
right. Yeah,
I understand
right.
the elections
Yeah,
are important and exciting too, but
yeah,
this it's
right.
nothing it's a microcosm in this bigger thing,
Yeah,
this bigger power paradigm
right.
shift that's happening in the world right now, and people
Yeah.
don't seem to
But
really
also
care
is,
until all of a sudden
people
they
also
will
forget.
because it's
Right.
staring them right in the
Yeah.
face.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, yeah, there's one
well maybe we'll
okay, I'll
end it
just say
there,
very
Dad. We're
quickly.
about at an hour, and
Okay. Okay.
okay, sorry, go
Something's
ahead.
going on there. So
Yeah, my
okay,
dog's
I was just
going
going to say
crazy,
very quickly.
so
Your
she's
dog's
just
going crazy. Okay. Okay. Well, I was just going to say very
yeah.
quickly that's just kind of a kind of an oddity of the American system is that the president's main responsibility, as the office of the presidency was designed back in the founding, is foreign policy, is military affairs. That's really he's not supposed to be focused on domestic affairs. And the truth is that he really doesn't have nearly the power in domestic affairs that he does when it comes to the military. He's the commander in chief. He can make decisions to start wars or not. This is a huge responsibility. But in every election, it's like foreign policies generally put number 10 after nine other domestic issues, and that's crazy. I mean, again, the U.S. president has so much damage to do for good or evil in the world, through his control of the military and foreign policy, but it's just virtually not talked about or thought about. But we'll end up with somebody who probably doesn't know anything about foreign policy or any understanding of military capabilities and affairs, and the disaster will continue.
Well, the U.S. is about to get a serious reality check, so maybe we'll start to care about foreign policy then.
Okay, maybe
Um,
we will. Maybe.
okay, Dad. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. Well, we'll end it here. Okay. Thanks a lot, and have a good time there in Moscow.
I will.